Let's get ready to RPG!
RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Knights of Last Call. My name is Derek Melenda, and I am tired. It has been a fantabulously long week. Lot of work, and just been grinding really hard, working some really long hours, and probably put in, one of those like we've all had those, right? The 60-hour weeks or whatever. Anyways, but we're here. We're here because I love this and I love you. Hello. And I even had promised earlier today to Mr. Glicker that I would be on a show. So stream number 2 for me today. That being said, yeah, correct, GM Scott. Oh no, shit. All right, hold on a sec. Ben, wait. Ben I was so busy, Ben. I just literally threw the stream together. Our good friend Ben is gonna join. Hold on a sec here. Hold on. Here we go. Well, Ben is not Ayla, but we can change that. Hold on. All right. Oh, no. Hold on. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this wonderful stream. Oh no, Ben, I started the thing and now it won't let me do anything. So I don't know. This is great. My camera died. That's cool. We'll just fix it in post. Yes. All right, deactivate. Activate. Hey, there I go. I'm back. Anyways, no, the stream didn't fizzle out. I just messed up. Ben, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get you on video, but can we get you on a call? Is that all right? Is that all right for everybody? Because I messed that up. All right, Ben, I am sending you a link. All right. So again, I apologize. I was going to. Ben asked for him to jump on, and I was so busy I forgot. Anyways, but I can't get the camera set up because it's all messed up. But Ben can join us, and he could be part of the action. All right. So what I was saying, busy week. Anyways, this may be a very rare episode because I'm definitely not trying to try to have a 3-hour stream tonight. So we're gonna pretty much get right into it, ASAP. All right. Well, I think I hear Ben.
Testing.
Oh yes. All right. Excellent. I think everybody can hear you. Okay. So tonight we're going to be talking about 7th Sea. This game. And 7th Sea is this is the 2nd edition of 7th Sea, and I don't really know that much about it. I picked up the game, and like a lot of Knights of Last Call people, I picked up the game because of Ben. And so my sort of my introduction to that was through that, but I never really got a chance to dive into it. Now, the other reason I picked it up is because it's by John Wick, and John Wick is, I think, an important game designer in the history of the RPG history. In our RPG history. I don't necessarily know that he is my favorite designer, but he definitely is an important one. So I think there's something to be said about that. So Ben, since you are the one who kind of brought me to this game in the sense that you introduced us to it, and I know you have not only played it, but you're kind of a collector at this point. How did 7th Sea get onto your radar?
Yeah, it's an interesting game because when we consider what are our favorite games in quotes or whatever, it's always changing, it's evolving. Yet since I have been introduced to 7th Sea, which was originally I think in 2017, it's consistently in that top 5. Everything else kind of shifts position, how I'm feeling at the moment, but almost always ends up in that top 5. It is that strong of a game. It's a very particular game. It does a very particular thing very, very well. It doesn't try to do anything else. Oh, am I on there?
I'm bringing you on.
Woo.
It's we're kind of doing it a little bit of a hack version of it, but you're there.
As you can see, my
Yeah.
collection.
Well, that's why I was like, I got to figure out a way to get Ben on, at least on the stream, because he's got his whole 7th C setup. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, Ben is very famous for being very stingy with his shelf space. He doesn't have that much. So for him to have that many hardbacks is saying something.
Yeah, it's a battle of attrition on my bookshelf.
Right.
That one is up there. So I was introduced to the game by John Wick at PAX Unplugged.
Oh, by John Wick himself.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
this
okay.
was, I think, right before his move to Chaosium, when it was still John Wick Presents solo. And I knew a little bit about the game from the first edition. And he was hawking the new version, which had just gone into print, I think, after the Kickstarter. A couple of the Kickstarters had come out at that point. There were a couple of the books out. And I was intrigued. I mean, I said, what's the pitch for the game? And John said, you answer the question, what would Errol Flynn do? Is the answer to any question you have in this game. And I'm a huge Errol Flynn fan, so I said, all right, let's do it. I got the book. We played it in my local group here in New York City. We played it, within 3 or 4 months after that PAX. We're playing a game of 7th Sea. And I was a player in that game, not GM. And a friend of mine who's a very good GM, he just took to it really quick. And man, I loved everything about it. And then since then, I've just consistently been interested in exploring it, running it. As you'll see when we start getting into it, there's a lot to unpack from this game. It's all setting, and you could spend so much time in one section of the game world that it gets pretty deep. And that's what I've been doing, basically, just exploring like different, I guess, concepts that he introduces in the game itself. It's worth noting that Mark Diaz-Truman was one of the designers.
I saw that,
on this game. Yeah, so it's got his fingerprints all over it. And there's some very interesting wording that you read that is like, it's just very Magpie-centric.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's kind of my introduction to the game. It's consistently been, I consistently play it at least once or twice a year. And then, in fact, for this year, for PAX Unplugged, we had about 8-9 people that every night I did an off-site game after PAX each night. We started on Thursday night, and we played 7C.
There you go.
Yeah.
So obviously there's something you said there that I think is important. And I think for you to all understand my context going into this, obviously John Wick is also the original creator, I should say, of Legend of the Five Rings. And Legend of the Five Rings, and in fact, when I open up the PDF here in a second, you will see this movie or this book definitely has a movie kind of feel to it. And specifically there's literally what looks like a movie poster is kind of inside the splash of the book. And so there's this idea of, even with Legend of the Five Rings, of he was trying to do samurai drama. He was trying to do Kurosawa. He loved the idea of these sort of movie cultures, and how do I take this genre, this movie genre essentially, and how do I bring that to the table? And that's definitely for me with Legend of the Five Rings, and I think you see that the DNA of that. And so for you to talk about him saying, I love Errol Flynn, like I wanted to, what would Errol Flynn do? And so this is very clearly in that, that swashbuckling, I think of like, I guess, what is it? The 40s and the 50s or whatever, the golden era.
30s.
And 30s, 40s, 50s. And like the Robin Hood and, all those movies. And so it's interesting that, when you look at a game like this, you have to put that hat on.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess I would call it the emulationist hat, right? Where you're trying to evoke a genre and a feel and a setting. It's It's not as so much about like, oh, I want to be the most tactically mindful, compelling game of all time.
Yeah. Can I dodge? Is a popular question that's discussed in the rules, and the answer is there is no dodge skill. That's not something you do in this game. He wants to break you out of that mindset of that gamist kind of approach. It's very, very cinematic as a game. However, it's also important to note that it doesn't begin and end with those like golden era swashbuckling films either. It does also owe a lot to like Pirates of the Caribbean, Princess Bride. There's references to Princess Bride like crazy in it. So it's not too myopic in its view. It does cover quite a bit of ground, but all of it equally cinematic, I would say.
Yeah. Which I think is great because again, it's trying to do more than just be, single dimensional. I mean, obviously I've always said this before, Legend of the Five Rings is Legend of the Five Rings. I mean, it's not going to be the game that that you take into the, I don't know, to do your dungeon crawling game with. That's just not going to be the case. There's only so much you can do. But Legend of the Five Rings, I think as a downside, if I had to give it one, was it is pretty single focused. Whereas, this, I think setting just because it's not quite so laser focused as like specifically you are a noble samurai in this drama world, does have, I think, possibly, some additional, you could have a very intrigue-based campaign. You could have a very naval-based campaign, right?
Oh,
There's even magic, as I understand it, in the game.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, a lot of sorcery. It's really interesting. It's kind of like the game is very folkloric in that the magic such as it exists in the game is more like traditional sorcery in the way that it works. It's dangerous. It's rare. It often is associated with bloodlines, that sort of thing. So it's definitely in the game, though, and you could play a high magic version of the game with krakens and stuff like that. Or you could do it, like you said, as a straight kind of like British military master and commander.
Oh, yeah, right. And that's one of my favorite movies of all time, actually, Master and Commander. It's a shame they never made any of the sequels that the book had. But exactly, yes. So again, there's a lot of dials I think that you could do here. And so so we've got the PDF pulled up here, but before we get into it, I am going to just hop over to the character sheet because I think that's an interesting area to start. You kind of get a good feel for how complex is this game really? What's going on with this game? What does the game care about? Because if it's on the character sheet, in theory, it is something that the game cares about. And so we see here we have a pretty skimpy character sheet. There's not a lot going on here.
It is Spartan.
Yeah, and there's no back to this. But there are a couple of things I think that we can all agree kind of jump out, and at least jump out to me, some of which I'm vaguely aware of. So obviously up in the upper left, you have your character's name, your name. Concept remains to be seen if that's just like narrative or if it actually, has a class, type concept or like a Fabula Ultima core identity type thing. Nation, and one of the things I think we'll definitely get into is similar to Legend of the Five Rings. Who you are is important. Where you're from and what your culture is very important in Legend of the Five Rings. You're not just some samurai, you're a lion samurai. And I know that like Rokugan is sort of a fantasy fictionalized amalgamation of Japan and maybe some other East Asian cultures. The world of, is it Theah?
Theah. Mm-hmm.
Theah is essentially an alternate history magic quasi Europe with some of the serial numbers scratched off, right?
Yes. It's analogous to the Age of Sail Europe. Very, very similar. And also, if you had to select like a class or playbook, that would be your nationality. Your nationality is your class in this game. It's a combination of your nationality and your background.
Interesting. Okay. And so like, in other words, it's saying something about you, it's more than just fluff. It's kind of like saying like, yeah, this means something that you're from this place. The same way, again, I can't help but be biased here. To say that you're a lion samurai is saying a lot. To say that you're a crane samurai is saying a lot. We also have religion, and again, being a sort of a copy or an emulation of the Age of Sail, and in sort of near Europe and the associated probably Middle East and near areas, I imagine religion is a big deal.
Yes, just to go into just a little bit, the world is set just after a period of time where there was, I'm going to use the real world analogs to it instead of the Theah countries, but essentially the Vatican Church, which is the center of most of the religion in Theah, recently was ousted from the country where they originally had their empire based out of, and was moved to a new location, and this prompted a war called the War of the Cross. That war has just kind of ended in the world of the game, and the nations are kind of coming to grips with what that actually means. And the other big theme that is prevalent in 7th is these kingdoms are starting to become nations. So there is a shift that you are starting to see in the way that they conduct business with each other. There is the formation of trade unions, guilds, and intrigue or propaganda is just starting to become a tool that is being used. So now you have these courtiers and these courts that you can go to. So if you want like full-on court intrigue, if that's your thing, this game will just handle that in spades. If that's the kind of game you want to play, or if you want to have a section that just focuses on it, it does it really well. But that's a bit of the backdrop. There are other religions and faiths as well that take place in the game, but Vatican Church is the big one. And of course, and as part of the fallout, it kind of got them on the back foot, and then they kind of retaliated by clamping down harder, and then came the Inquisition. So that adds yet another layer that you can have. If you want to do a Three Musketeers style thing, it's right there. It's just ripe for the taking.
You know, it's funny. Obviously, there's a certain amount of liberty, if you will, taken with this map. It's obviously an analog of Europe. But I got to be honest with you, it really, really, really looks like the Warhammer Old World map, which is also, sort of in Warhammer they have essentially their version of Fantasy France and their version of Fantasy Spain and their version of, Fantasy Italy. And it's kind of interesting to, again, a lot of games have done this over the years. And even in Warhammer, they call basically Britain is called Avalon, which is, to the East is Grand Cathay, right? So it's very similar in that aspect. We got a tip from GM Scott. $25. Thank you, GM Scott. He says, what does he say? He says,
GM Scott tipped $25. Always love hearing Ben's opinions and experience with RPG games.
GM Scott, thank you. Yeah, I love hearing from Ben as well. Again, this is just one of those instances where, I've learned a lot from him as well. But this is a game that I'm interested to learn more about. So let's get into it. Character sheet. Okay. We have a box for Arcana. There's nothing there. So that tells us there is magic in this game, maybe, but I know nothing about it. Then we have stories, and it's got a couple of things filled out. Name, goal, reward, step 1. And I'll be honest with you, I've played a lot of RPGs over a long period of time. I have no idea what this could possibly be used for. All right, and then we get into something that I'm a little bit more familiar with, and I don't know how exactly it works in 7th, 2nd edition. But Legend of the Five Rings, before the Fantasy Flight games, used a system called Roll and Keep, where you would roll a number of dice and you would keep some of them, usually D10s. And in those systems, you had Legend of the Five Rings, you had traits or attributes, and you had skills. And your attributes and skills combined tells you how many dice you were going to roll. And we can see here there's some dots for your brawn, your finesse, your resolve, your wits, your panache. And remember, too, what a game is telling you the game is about, it does it through its mechanics, right? As Ben says, rules are setting. So if a game has these ability scores, essentially, it's kind of saying, that's the kind of character you have. Like, there's a lot of stuff here where you might go, man, a lot of this stuff sounds very similar. It's like, well, no, but in a world like of swashbuckling, Age of Adventure, Age of Sail, you need to make sure there's a difference between panache and wit, since because there's those are the subtle differences. And same thing with the skills. You can see that, what skills are there, what skills are not there. And that tells you a lot as well. Then it talks about ranks. You can re-roll a die. All right, so I'm assuming if you have like 3 dots in a skill, maybe you can re-roll one of them when you roll the pool.
Yes. So the number of pips you have is your rank in that trait or that skill.
Got it. And then at rank 4, you sets of 15 are 2 raises. Not sure what that means, but maybe it's tied to that kind of roll and keep idea. And then lastly, at rank 5, your 10s explode, and then again, that is very much from the old roll and keep system. It's in the Fantasy Flight Games version as well, where if you roll the exploder success, you get to keep it and then roll another dice and potentially could keep going. Then we have a bunch of other white text, backgrounds and advantages. Okay. So again, this might be an area where we write advantages, makes me think like feats or something else similar, but will remain to be seen. And then there is the death spiral.
Yes.
Now, I do know a little bit about this, and this is essentially your hit points.
Kind of, sort of.
Kind of, sort of.
It is a story game, first and foremost.
Sure.
It like you said before, this is, to me, is a very high S game, but not in the simulation part of it's not trying to replicate a physical world. It is trying, and it even mentions this, and I'm sure that this section was written by MDT. There's a section that talks about it replicating the metaphysics of this kind of world or the genre. In that case, in that end, it's very emulationist,
right.
But it does it in such an immersive fashion.
It doesn't feel like emulation.
Exactly.
Right. It feels like, do you ever watch, oh God, what's that? The movie with Tim Allen where they make fun of Star Trek, Galaxy Quest, and they like disarm the bomb, but it like doesn't, and like with like 20 seconds left, but it keeps.
It can't go down after 1 second. Yeah, it automatically stops.
It has it stopped. It's like, of course it can't stop at 20. It has to wait. They finished too early. It's like in that world, that's how the physics work, right?
Yes.
Because the people who built it off of this presumption from a TV show. But
Absolutely.
But one of the things that we can see here that I think is most important, because in some ways, this is kind of opposite of what I would think of when you think of a death spiral, right? When you think of a death spiral, you think of you're getting beat up and you're getting worse, because guess what? That's what happens in real life. In real life, if I get beaten to within an inch of my life, if I get shot, that is not the moment where I go, no, that's where I pull through. You just usually bleed out and die. But we can see here that as we fill in this death spiral, there are these stars along the way.
Those are dramatic wounds.
But rather than wound us, they're much more narrative. In a way, you can see that at the first one, we get a bonus die, right? So we're doing better. But at the second one, now our villains get bonus dice.
Yes,
and at the third one, our 10s explode. So like now we're getting the same bonus we needed to be really high rank for. And then only at the final stage and it doesn't say you die. It says you become helpless.
You are helpless. Yes.
So that does say a lot about what the game is expecting to happen and the kind of things that are happening. I mean, you take a dramatic wound and suddenly you're performing better.
Yes.
So, that is an interesting idea.
Yeah, because you're not trying to simulate the death of the character. You are simulating the drama that they're going through,
right,
and what that means in terms of the framing of that scene that you're in. And the other thing, we're talking about like physics and metaphysics, emulation versus simulation. There are some John Wick kind of like house rules that I also use that I would recommend everyone just universally adopt into their 7th C game as well. Those are all glass, all windows, and glass is made of sugar. And your heroes always make a soft landing. So when you get chucked out of that 2nd story window, A, it breaks as they go through it, and B, they'll make a landing on something somehow.
There's always some cart full of hay or...
Yes, yes. If you think of Cutthroat Island, the chase scene in Cutthroat Island, that is pretty much what this would emulate.
And so here's what I was talking about before about like the style of this. This looks just like a movie poster, which I think is really, really interesting. So again, we've got some, intro, and here we are into the table of contents. Now, again, we're going to try to do an abbreviated session here. So we're not going to be able to get into everything, but I do want to point out a couple of things. One is the first 100 pages or so of this book. And, I would say it's a medium length book. It's 300 pages. It's not, Pathfinder 2 or, one of those other big chonkin Against the Dark Master. But it's not a 100-page Dragonbane either, right? It's 300 pages. It's a real nice, what I would consider classic RPG size book. but 100 pages is used to describe the world, Theah, first. So before we even get into making a character, before we get into how how the game actually works, how does the action work, the drama work, it is going to tell us about the world.
Yes.
And so that's a lot of setting.
It is. And I do have a top tip.
That's a lot.
Someone is looking to run this game. What I would strongly recommend new GMs do is constrain it to a single nation or a single nation of backgrounds for the players. Then they only have to read one section. It keeps everyone kind of on an even keel. You decide some kind of basic story that will align everyone's motives and play through that. And then once you get through that, you can start expanding it to the other nations. But if you start with everyone wanting to play another nation, it's hard on the GM because you're expected to have to know the entire book at that point, and it's a lot.
No, it makes perfect sense because that is always the advice I give for people with Legend of the Five Rings. I said, don't let every character be from a different clan. I know everybody's like, oh, I want to be the cool dragon samurai and I want to be the cool crane samurai. I'm like, well, it's going to be a nightmare. You're going to have to know way more than you would ever need to know. On the other hand, if you just make it about one clan and the trials and tribulations of that clan, the group has inherently built-in motivations. Everybody has this commonality of background, and you can kind of explore the world through the eyes of that particular lens.
Yes.
And then, like you said, if you tell somebody, hey, you guys are all going to be from Castile, which is, I imagine, fantasy Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Go read those 6 pages.
Yes.
Right. Like that's
that might be pushing it with some groups.
that is very true. Go to ChatGPT and say, give me the summary of Castile from 7th Sea. But I think that's interesting because that does 2 things to me. Number one, it tells me, order matters. So this game is trying to say, hey, the setting here is a big part of the game. I know a lot of people say, I don't always agree with them, but I know a lot of people say that Pathfinder's the world is as much about Galarian as it is the system. And a lot of people, there's almost I think there are more books about the world of Galarian than there is about Pathfinder 2nd edition, the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's the same idea. I think people are sort of very, invested in that world. And I imagine that this is trying to say, hey, this is a big part of what we're doing here.
It's your class, essentially, but it's not so limiting because of the backgrounds. It's not like, well, if we're all playing Avalonians, then we have to be Knights of the Grail, or we have to be part of the Secret Order, or we have to be this or that. It just sets a framework and kind of like a commonality that allows everyone to not have to go too crazy with the world, like that level of deep dive straight away.
Right. Now, I'm curious. I'm going to put a poll in the chat, okay? All right, you get yourself a new RPG book, right? It opens with fiction. Okay? Do you read it?
That's a great poll question because I'll tell you, most times I don't, but the fiction that opens this book is so good. Like when it ends, you're kind of like, oh man. But what's interesting about this particular story that it opens with is it nails the feel of the game so well. And it's kind of hard to describe unless you've actually played this game. But I mean, it literally feels like you played through a movie at the end of a session. Like it's like an entire movie's worth of content shoved into 2 or 3 hours. It's very fast moving.
I do like Doc Flamingo. He says, yes, but I'm annoyed.
Yeah, like, sometimes they're kind of weak, they're too long, or it doesn't really tell you anything about the world. VSD is another one that opens with a stellar piece of fiction.
Cephalodog says, I'm a World of Darkness player. You already know my answer. I mean, I'm not. I mean, again, we're kind of.
It's the entire book.
Yeah,
it's the story.
We're kind of shooting the shit here, but this is a legitimate short story. And
it's about 6-7 pages, I think.
Yeah, and double columned. And no art to break it up. So for me, this is a little too long. But like for my personal taste, like I'll read it. But it can be a little long in that thing. I do like the style of the art. It's got a painterly look to it.
And what's funny is that first image that you see, those are all the characters that are in the preceding story.
Very nice.
So if you read the fiction and you look at the image, you're like, I know who these people are.
You know, this font here, this "Welcome to the Seventh Sea," it feels very reminiscent of Legend of the Five Rings font.
See, to me, I think Michael Bay when I see that.
So, you know, here again, you know, great. This is just, you know, this is great game writing. It's not necessarily design. It's just good game writing. What is this game about? Welcome to this game. And it's telling us what this world is about: piracy, diplomacy, archaeology, exploration. I like it when games tell us what they're about and then deliver right on that promise. And again, very clearly spelling it out here: swashbuckling, sorcery, piracy, and adventure, diplomacy and intrigue, archaeology and exploration, romance and revenge. And you can easily see how that might be a variety of adventures, or you could do an entire campaign. I didn't even really think about archaeology and exploration, but that's like a really cool idea there.
When we get through the setting a little bit more, you'll see why that comes into play. But also, each one of those are stories that are on the character sheet. And as we go through the walkthrough, you'll see how these titles in the front tie all the way back into the character sheet. It's all very well integrated in terms of the way the information is presented.
So we got 60% of people said that they will read the fiction. 40% said they will not. And JMH says he's got to run. Thank you, JMH, for your $5 super chat. So I'll catch the VOD later. Thanks for the great content. Thank you, Ben and Derek. Awesome. Thank you, JMH, and appreciate the support. Yeah. So again, it's a very interesting idea that they go out and spell this. Then they talk about what kind of game is this. And again, not to beat around the bush, Seventh Sea is a cooperative storytelling game.
Yes.
I mean, it. And again, that may not be your deal. Like when you think of, when you think of a, you know, swashbuckling game, you might be thinking of like the Swashbuckler from Pathfinder 2nd Edition, right?
Oh yeah. And I mean, you know me, I
don't
shy away from the crunchy games.
Right. I was about to say that's not usually your jam
at all.
At all.
This doesn't even tell you it's an RPG. I mean, they're telling you this is not that. It's occupies such a unique space. It's fascinating. It's a space I enjoy exploring.
Yeah, and again, there's a lot of what I would call, you know, the indie game story movement wording here. You know, when players get together to play, they tell tales of the adventure of a group of characters. They use their collective talents to make these stories come alive. And again, it even kind of calling out here that the game master is also a player that just helps navigate and arbitrate. In fact, like each session is called an episode, right? Yeah. So, I mean, they are really leaning hard into the cinematic concepts here.
Yeah, there's chapters, episodes, the way that it kind of flows together to create a story, which is these overarching plots, which we will get to when we get to that part in the book that explains how stories work and how they kind of intertwine into each other as you're playing. But essentially, those just provide a framework for the play, that it facilitates play, I guess you would say. And I think find interesting, a lot of the concepts that are in this game are all over Fabula Ultima. And it's funny to see how those gameplay loops are very similar, but the methodology that 7th Sea uses is so different from the methodology that Fabula Ultima uses. But at their core, they're essentially almost the same thing. Player-driven narrative, cooperative storytelling. Both of those games are very, very much in that. And the GM is basically there to create obstacles, create drama, and facilitate what the players want to do. I mean, not to create stories.
It sounds very. It sounds very much like you know, in a way, kind of like a PBTA kind of concept.
Absolutely.
You know,
you'll see some of the phraseology is very similar too.
You know, and obviously with people like MDT involved, I mean, it shouldn't come as any surprise. And Doc Flamingo does bring up an interesting point, because I know that people could be very like pro or, you know, kind of be against that. This is, I'm a big fan of like pirate lore. I think he means like real life. And I think that makes me resent the idea of not using a real Earth setting. And, you know, I'll be honest with you. I think the idea of, you know, and not like samurai in the cool way, like I want some lame, like, I mean, like the whole concept of the samurai, the Bushido, the caste, is very interesting. However, I am not an expert on ancient Japanese history and the culture, nor do I plan on studying it. And so being in a fantasy world kind of gives me a lot of leeway. And I actually really appreciate that. I could understand that in the real world, like if you're really an expert on Japanese culture, you go to play Legend of the Five Rings, you're just rolling your eyes constantly like, oh, the real Sengoku period was far more, far more intense than this. And, what a missed opportunity. And that was just fine. I mean, that's great, but we can't, it's a classic thing where, somebody makes a climb check in an RPG and you got a guy in your group who's a rock climber and he goes, yeah, that would never happen,
Yeah. I think you're right though. I think that's where that simulation emulation divide comes. I would rather play something like this, which allows us to emulate a lot of what we've seen, excises a lot of the badness, and doesn't even go there. So you don't have to worry about it. It's like, X-card really isn't a thing in this game, for example. Whereas if you were playing it in the actual real setting, you would absolutely need to have those kinds of conversations up front. And this just abstracts all of that, and it's not what the game is about. This game, if you're looking for pirate emulation or simulation, that's not what this game is about. This game is about exploring what does it mean to be a hero, specifically. That is what the game is doing, and it does it through the lens of, what did we see? Swashbuckling, daring do, magic, archaeology, intrigue, and revenge, and those kinds of stories.
But yeah, like it's definitely, it's got kind of a mouse guard vibe there, right? Like it matters not what you fight, what do you fight for, right? Like what does it mean to be a hero? Yeah. What does it mean to, what will you fight for? What will you die for? What will you stand for?
Can you die in this game? That's another interesting question.
That's great. That's true. All right. So then like I said before, we get into chapter 2, which is Theah, which is again their fantasy medieval Europe. And it's pretty detailed. There's 100 pages here. We're not going to go through all of them, but we can see here that the spreads, include a piece of art, a quote, a coat of arms, information about the culture, the names, the clothing, the art, music. I mean, this is like the currency, the customs, the religion. There's a lot of setting depth here, which is really surprising to me how much setting depth there is.
Yeah, it'll walk you through. If you were going to cosplay this, you could easily do it based off of the descriptions in this book.
And this is a nice little touch here, too. I like that it ends with, what are their current relations with the other nations or other groups?
Yes, because remember, they're just coming out of this period of war.
Right.
Everyone is now kind of drawing their lines on the battlefield and using what just happened to further their own ends. So you kind of have to know who the players are. Some nations are stronger than others. Some nations have advantages, others don't. And how you navigate that intrigue line is a huge part of the game. Huge. Because, where your navies are and what straits are they protecting, that controls the trade coming in and out, for example. So how would a country that doesn't have as strong a navy, or they're coming in, how do they overcome that? How did they overcome that challenge? All of that is reflected through how those relationships are reflected.
Now, this is all in the core book. So is it safe to say that everything in here is kind of fairly common knowledge?
Yes.
Okay.
The only things, by common knowledge, you mean knowledge known to everyone in the world?
Yeah, correct.
Yes, with the exception of when it goes into the secret societies.
Okay.
And there are some things particularly relating to the nation, the Italian nation, Vodace. And there is a particular sect of people that live in Vodace called Fate Witches. And they have basically, there's like 3 or 4 layers to their background. There's the layer everyone knows that's outside of Vodace. There's the common person in Vodace. Then there are the people who deal with the Fate Witches. And then there's the Fate Witches themselves. So the players could have all of that knowledge. I think that's perfectly fine. But in the world, their characters might not know some or any of that particular information.
Yeah. So again, the game is definitely very setting forward and talking about creating good stories. And I suppose, you know, it's not just about creating good stories, right? It's about creating stories that fit this tone and this genre. And that's like the thing with like me with like Legend of the Five Rings. I want to tell samurai stories when I play those games. So like, you know, this is one of those games that, I mean, I'm not trying to like say I don't like it, but like I feel like you kind of have to do your homework, you know, a little bit. If you want to run a 7th Sea game, I feel like you need to, as a GM, you need to have some grasp of what's going on, because if you're just like making stuff up and it doesn't really tie back into this like evolving world and all this information, all this, then it's kind of just like, what, you know, we're just playing in some ordinary blank page world.
It could be hard too if your player are really into it and you don't know as much as they do. That could create like a friction, a rub in the game, because really you're playing it in this world. And if you don't like the world, then you're probably not going to like the game, and that's okay. You can move on. There are thousands of other games you can play.
Lug in chat is saying the spread is literally fire. I love it. I'm gonna let me switch over to the facing page.
Yeah, those 2-page.
It doesn't do it. It doesn't do it well. Damn. Book view. Here we go. Yeah, there we go. I mean, what a cool piece of art that is. You know.
Yeah, those 2-page full spreads are really amazing.
Yeah, very, very, very cool. So
I also love, if you go back to that image again. I love that they're both left-handed, or they're fighting left-handed. They're starting left-handed in that image, which is really great because you know what's coming next.
Doc Flamingo says, question, are the rules separable from the setting, or would that break it?
Yeah, this is a popular question. This actually came up in the deep dive that we did in the Discord, which is really in-depth, the deep dive that I did of this. Essentially, you could excise the core mechanics from the game. However, what you would be left with is so flimsy, I would say. It would be really hard to make work.
But like, could I take, if I like Theah, say, and I don't like the 7th Sea RPG, could I do a PBTA hack and use Theah?
I think as we get more into the crunch, I will let you decide.
Okay.
That I know what my answer to that would be. It would be no, but I don't mind the game the way that it plays out. However, I still think it would be difficult to do. But you know, more power to you if you think you can do it. It'd be really hard to do it with degrees of success, because this game isn't about degrees of success, as you'll see. There's so much power in the player's hands and their characters. It's all success, all the time.
Yes.
So there's no, I somehow created some weird complicated. That doesn't come into this. That's not the way this game is played.
Yeah, and I see in chat there's some vitriol. There's some people going back and forth. Some people like 2nd edition. Some people dislike second edition. And this doesn't surprise me, because again, I'm not as familiar with this. But Legend of the Five Rings has 5 editions, and I love the 5th edition, which is the Fantasy Flight Games edition. It's the one with the weird Genesis dice. And the people who played 4th edition and 3rd edition, which came out of AEG and had the roll and keep and the D10s, they fucking hate 5th edition. Like, they think it is like the devil. It is horrible. It's not even worth, it's not even worth kindling, right? It should be buried, not burned, because you don't want to release that into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Whereas I love 5th edition, and I actually think that the 3rd and 4th edition of Legend of the Five Rings is, it's nothing special.
Yeah.
So it's, there's obviously people have preferences, and sometimes games change, and I'm a big fan of it because I already own that game. Why do I need that game another time? I mean, I don't know about you, Ben, but I know you love 1st edition AD&D, and you love, I think you're a big fan of 3rd edition AD&D or D&D, or at least you were. But are you really a fan of 2nd edition AD&D?
No, I'm not.
Yeah. And because it's just a revision. And it tried to clean some stuff up, but at the end of the day, it's like it wasn't trying to do anything new, which is fine. Sometimes that's what you need, I guess, to make the books. But I like it when games, try to do something different and take it in a different direction.
And I agree that game exists. If you want to play that game, you can play that game. We're not talking about 1st edition tonight. We're talking about 2nd edition, and
yeah, maybe there you go. Maybe at some future point we could do a 1st edition look, and then those of you who love 1st edition but not 2nd edition can can come and extol its virtues.
Yes, convert us.
So again, this is just very odd for me. Again, this is just first look. It's like, this is like the character creation section, and it still feels like it's a fucking background.
Yes.
You know, like we're so like there's no ability scores. It's just more detail about the countries.
Yes.
And you know, it's like,
yes,
it's very unusual, you know.
It is, but it uses a tarot deck, so it's cool.
Of course. So yeah, again, I mean, here we go. It's like, you're like, okay, I'm ready to make my character, you know, and we just have, and I understand.
Not so fast, hero.
Right.
First, you must have some more background.
Right. First, there's more background, you know, and, you know, it says this section gives you the rundown on all the nations. It tells you what the heroes from those nations are like, so you can decide where you want your hero to hail from. Every nation has its own culture, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
You know, and
I think this is the bit that if you didn't read the 80 pages preceding it, that's where these little breakdowns come down.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. But you know, and it's interesting too, because this is a game that is very much, I think, going out of its way to try to say, we don't want you to just make a character. We want you to, you know, make a character that lives in this world.
Yeah.
And I mean, I certainly, again, when I'm playing a game that has this kind of rich, detailed setting, and that's part of the game's charm, then yeah, I want people to buy into that.
Yeah.
But so we haven't seen anything here from, you know, we get what they maybe look like, what their typical professions might be. They're you're from you're from fantasy England. Well, you're probably a sailor or a fisherman or you know, whatever. Again, more information about the religion and your general attitudes and you know, kind of what's your style of swagger?
Yeah, because the Avalonian Church is different from the Vatican Church, right?
Well, of course it is, because there's because the Church of England, obviously.
Exactly.
And so again, there's just those fun parallels. And I will also,
so what's interesting about it though is this ties directly into the folklore of each of those countries too. So for example, Avalon, the reason that Queen Elaine is the ruler of a sovereign nation is because she was chosen by the spirit dwellers called the I forget the name of them in Avalon to be their ruler, and they gifted her with a thing called the Grail, and whoever holds the Grail runs the country. That's the way it goes. And then there's all sorts of talk about, well, how did she actually acquire it? Did she enslave these people? What is the deal between the Glamour Isles and its ruler? All that's in the background of every country, though. Like, there's the historical or historicity behind it, but then there's this. It goes, oh yeah, all the folklore that from those countries, that's true too.
Right. And so again, you know, here we've got Fantasy France. I'm assuming Montaigne is Fantasy France. And we have not seen anything that we would call, you know, a normal character creation process. So after we go through what makes you a Thean hero, we get to the actual hero creation rule. So again, at this point, we had 100 pages of setting lore.
Yes.
And then we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 or 50 more pages about what it's like to, you know, be a person from or a hero from one of these countries. And now we can finally start deciding. So
yes.
And hey, look, it's the game of 20 questions.
Yes. Yep. Everyone's favorite. And this could be a stumbling block, I will say too. So I have another top tip. Yep. If you're going to be running this as you're just dipping your toe in the water. You just want to try and see. There is a book. It is called Heroes and Villains. It is full of NPC heroes and villains, but they can be played as well. I would play with those pre-gens. Ignore anything that has reference to rules you don't understand or don't want to know, and just play them as they lie at first, and it will help you understand a little bit like when they mean concept, because each one of those characters in that book comes with a fully fleshed out background, and everything they do ties into their motives.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably why I like this game so much, is because it's got that burning wheel thing of you are your motivations determine how you do a thing, and then that powers up what you're doing, and it feeds back and allows you to increase those abilities, which leans back into your motivations again, and it just keeps going around and around and around.
Right. It's a cycle that sort of promotes, it's like the opposite of a death spiral, but for making your character interested and tied to the world. And
Yes.
it leads just to more adventure and more excitement and more, things. And it's more like those cool moments that, I know you know what I'm talking about, Ben, but those transcendent moments at the game table where something that no one created emerges anyways. It's like it appears from just the collaborative efforts of everybody. And it's like this unique story, and it's got its own, plot points and its own beats. And it's like, it's so that is such a powerful moment. So again, I love the game of 20 questions. I love it for Legend of the Five Rings. I think that, asking these questions is a great way to get people to think more about their character.
This is true. And the book does say you can skip it if you want.
Sure.
You can totally skip these 20 questions. You can go in as the nameless, faceless hero and fill it in as you go. That's perfectly valid as well.
That is actually pretty cool too. And we'll play it, we'll do it live, we'll play it as we figure it out. I will say though, that as I look at this, one of my favorite things about the Legend of the Five Rings 20 questions in the 5th edition Fantasy Flight Games version, is you answer these questions, but then that determines, what maybe one of your starting skills is, or what one of your rings is, and what one of your distinctions is. So I do like that there's that kind of mechanical tie-in. And but I do think that is a really cool way to just get people to sit down and think about their character. Now, I will say that it is as you discover more about your hero during play, just change the answers if you like, right? Nothing's real until you make it real, right?
That is true.
So that's really great stuff. And again, we are on page 136.
Yeah.
And we have not
a single mechanic
not
yet.
a single mechanic yet. I just want to point. And again, the book is 300 pages long. So we're about halfway through the book. And we have not gotten to, and we've been in character creation for the last 10 minutes. And it's just been about your motivations and what you think about the world. And, just like these, and again, the game is asking you questions that in theory should be a distinguishing feature in this kind of setting. Like, what does your hero think of sorcery? That could be an important plot point to this game.
Absolutely. Because if you come from a certain country and you're of a certain religion, your view of those kinds of things is going to be prescribed. Yeah. However, if you're playing someone that's against type, it'd be like, well, I'm from Castile and I'm a member of the Vatican Church, but I think that, that the end justifies the means perhaps. And that's maybe sorcery isn't so bad.
Right.
And then all of a sudden now you have a character that is different from everyone else.
Right.
They have a unique, distinct feature, or you can lean into it and go, yeah, I sold out my aunt to the Inquisition because I thought she was a witch, or whatever the case is.
So Beowulf says something, and I don't really have an answer to this, but I do have a comparison. He says, I don't like how the Viking, the Vestenland's tech level is clearly hundreds, if not thousands, of years earlier than the 1700s AD. It feels very jarring. I'm going to counter this with the Legend of the Five Rings example. The Legend of the Five Rings, as a fantasy space, takes place in a time and a place that would equate to, the 1600s or whatever like that of Japan. And in that real-time Japan, they had guns. Okay? They had lots of guns. That's like what a lot of the Ashigaru people did. I don't want guns in my Japanese, sword fighting game. And neither did John Wick. And so even though the Japanese historically should totally have had gunpowder and should totally have this stuff, they makes a couple bullshit things in the fantasy and in the world and how on and on. And they get rid of it. And so you have this, it's not real life. And so what I would say, I don't know anything about this game, but when I think of a Viking coming to this game as an uninformed, idiot white American, I have this mental image of what a Viking is. And it's not a guy wearing a silk shirt and, with, working as a primitive loom or steam engine, or, or like, or setting up on a galley with, with cannons. That's not what I think of when I think of a Viking.
Yeah. The other thing to keep in mind is, for example, in this world, there is navigation. And there are navigational techniques that didn't exist during the real world during this time. A lot of the more horrible racist-related stuff, race-related things that happened during the time don't exist in Theah. Right. Also, they have a knowledge of germs, for example, and of basic medicine that didn't exist during this time.
Correct.
So, I mean, if that's the lens at which you're looking at this game through, like you're picking that fine of a nit, you're not going to like the game. Just look elsewhere. Right. That's not what this is about.
Right. And I have seen, like, people who are really into Japanese culture, very into Japanese history, nitpick Rokugan for the same kind of things. And I'm not saying you're wrong at all. In fact, change it, make it interesting. I don't know, you make it different in your campaign. But I understand why they do it, because we have a certain. It's not trying to be a historical simulation. And I think a lot of people look at these games and think, "Oh, it should be." And no, that would be something different. That wouldn't be. It wouldn't be called Theah. It would just be called Earth, and it wouldn't be called Montaigne. It would be called France.
I'm sure Kenzer and Co. has looked at this setting and tried to think, like, how can we make a 600-page super crunchy pirate game?
That pirate game seems so. I mean, you've owned or played Aces and Eights, right?
Yes, both.
Yeah. Okay. And the shot clock. So here we finally get to it. Here we go. Some stats. All right. Every character has 5 traits defining what their strengths are. They are our brawn, our finesse, our resolve, our wits, and our panache. Or put another way, our strength, our dexterity, our wisdom plus con. Interesting. Our intelligence, and our charisma. We begin with all of our traits at 2, and we get 2 additional points that we can spend to increase our traits. Well, that's about as basic as it comes. So everybody starts with what I assume is 2 dice, basically, and you can get 2 points. So you have 2 at 3 or 1 at 4?
Yes, and I think in character creation, you can't have anything above a 3 to start.
Got it. Okay, so pick 2, basically. During step 0, you chose a nation. This is a very John Wick way of writing. If you skip step 0, you should seriously consider going back and doing it. There are some paragraphs in here that are like pure John Wick. Yeah, John Wick has it's not like Luke Crane, but he has that style of kind of like, I don't know, finger wagging, like, you thought you knew better? I don't think so.
Yeah, not quite as bad as Ken Hite, but
right.
Between the two.
So then we see that our nation does give us a game bonus, and we can basically it'll give us +1 to one of our 2 stats, so we get some choices. And again, showing that these people from nations are very interesting, and also something that's jumping out to me, I think I kind of knew that, is that at least as far as the PCs are concerned, everybody's a human, more or less.
Yes.
And so this is an interesting, like, one of the things that I like about Legend of the Five Rings, everybody is a human. And it's interesting because when they made the D&D 5th edition version of Rokugan, which is called Adventures in Rokugan for the 5e D&D audience, the very first thing in the book is, here are like 7 fantastic playable races that you can be. Oh, you have a party of
kitsune.
Your kitsune, your rat man, your kenku. Yeah. And it's like, it just turns into like a, crazy clusterfuck D&D party. When in reality that's not how that fantasy world had ever been portrayed. But you know what? I don't like that. But I don't hate Adventures of Rokugan. I understand it's telling a different story and a different version of that world.
Yeah, and I'm sure that if John Wick comes out with the 5e version of 7th Sea, that will be included.
So step 3 in our background, and that represents what we did before the game begins, where we were an artist, we were a soldier, we were a sailor.
Yeah. So this is a pretty important concept. When you start play, you are a hero with a capital H.
Yeah.
Every time they use hero, it's got a capital H.
It really does. It really does.
Your background was who you were before you took on the mantle of a hero. So your background is literally your background. You might have been a duelist at one point, but now you're a hero, and that's a very important distinction in the game itself and how you portray the character going forward. Because, for example, you might have a background, you're a criminal or something. That no longer applies to you. You can glean the benefits from it. You might have contacts and things like that, but you wouldn't do the things that you did before. You would never, for example, a duelist will never go, well, you know what? That was fun. I did whatever. I'm going to now open up a dueling school and go back to teaching kids or whatever. Once they picked up that mantle of hero, they're hero until they're done, essentially.
Got it. So backgrounds come with a quirk, a personality trait that is common among people from that background. If you act in accordance with a quirk from your background, you gain a hero point. You may only gain a hero point from a particular quirk once per session. Well, this is a very much a narrative forward mechanic. I mean, this is basically the classic fate compel. If you accept, if you act in accordance with your mechanical quirk, you get a hero point. I don't know what hero points do, but this is very much basically saying we want to reward you for playing up your character's unique traits. Backgrounds also give you advantages. Advantages are abilities that most Theans will never have. If your background lists an advantage, you may add it to your sheet at no cost. Each background also gives you a set of skills, which all begin at rank 1. Skills are specific bonuses for specific tasks. Skill can only be 5. So pick 2 different backgrounds from the following list. If you get all of your background's advantages, and you get rank 1 in all of your skills. If you have duplicate skills, add 1 more for a total of 2 points. So here, okay, so this is, and we get 2 of these. Is that the way that I read it?
Yes.
Okay. So I could be an archaeologist assassin. And
could.
and I would have these 2 quirks. And again, I can use each of these quirks once per session. And then I get these 2 advantages. And so I'd actually have 4 advantages. I'd have signature item, eagle eyes, fencer, and psst, over here. And then I get +1 to these 5 skills and +1 to these 5 skills. And since athletics is on both of them, I would end up with 2 dots or 2 ranks in the athletics skill.
Yes.
Okay. And, this list now, again, this is one of those things where it's like, I like backgrounds when they are like this, in the background, and they give you some mechanical benefits that seem useful. And then we move on from it.
Yeah, because you have to remember too, if you went through and answered those 20 questions, you already know the background. Or perhaps you picked a background and answered the 20 questions through that lens.
Right.
So this shouldn't take a very long time to do when you've done the hard part, which is the 20 questions.
Right. That is true. Because you'll already know what you are. So at that point, you're just trying to find, the thing that most fits what you've already sort of established. Do you think there's anything wrong with doing it the opposite?
No, I've had players do all manner of selection with no issue whatsoever.
Yeah. And I think this feels like a good list to me. I love it. Jenny.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of provocative stuff in this game.
Yeah, I can see that. But and you can definitely see like the kind of classic heroes, oh, I'm from the army. Oh, but again, I like that I was an aristocrat. I was a cavalry I was an army officer. So it's not just, scum of the earth type people. But like you said, no matter what your situation is, you're not that anymore.
Yes.
Very cool. Okay. So I don't know what any of these advantages do, but we'll have to look them up.
Yeah, if I had to pick a nit for the way the book is laid out, there is a lot of back and forthing when you're making a character because of just way the information is parsed out. I don't know if there's a better way to do it, but it is a lot of back and forthing.
Okay, cool. And then I see that there are backgrounds that only people from certain nations can take.
See, that's where you start getting into the intrigue level of the game. If you take the nation-specific backgrounds, that's where you unlock like your secret societies. You unlock very specific kinds of sorcery, very specific dueling schools. Every nation has its own style of fighting. So depending on where you're from, your dueling style will reflect where you are from. Very, very, very Princess Bride.
Yes, yes. I could be a consigliere. I can be Tom. All right. So skills are step 4. So we've got our background. We got 2 backgrounds. Those gave us some advantages and some skills and quirks.
Yeah,
right.
and Cephalodog, Dark Justin has a good point in the chat where he says that he copied the information from his background, like what the advantages are, onto the character sheet. You could do that with like a page reference, or you just get the gist of it. It really will make play go a lot faster because you reference them a lot during play.
Got it. Skills are an important part of your character. Skills determine your training talents, education. Anytime you make a risk, the GM will tell you which skill and trait to use and roll that many dice. Okay, so
yes,
a little nitpick here, but like, so there's this idea that the GM is setting the skill and the trait.
They can. So the game actually contradicts itself many, many times.
That's a great sign.
Oh yeah, I mean it, and just parsing out what a risk is versus what a sequence is, that takes a little bit of mental gymnastics to kind of wrap your head around.
Look,
however,
it's important to see the warts.
Yeah, and it's true, and I deducted points in my deep dive for those things. However, I will say this, that I'll use Burning Wheel because that is the ultimate game, right? In Burning Wheel, you have tests, right? Everything is through tests. In 7C, everything is through a risk. In other words, if there's no risk involved, it's not a risk. You just do it.
Right.
To do it, do it.
Right.
However, if there's any risk involved, it is now a risk. And the GM says, okay, you're trying to sneak onto this boat. That to me sounds like a stealth risk. And then the players can go, okay, I'm going to use this trait with this skill, thievery and this trait. And it's like, okay, well, if you're using like panache and thievery, that's a very different approach than using athletics and thievery. And you will wrap that into your approach.
Right.
The other thing that allows the GM to do is to focus it on just who's in that scene or what the most important aspect of that scene is. You don't need to have everyone rolling for a risk. You can just abstract it and go, okay, this is going to be this kind of a risk. What are you doing? Who's taking point on this approach to get everyone on board the ship, sneak on board the enemy captain ship? And how are you going to do that? And you put together this pool, you roll it, you get on with your life. That is its most basic form, is risks. And when you are running the game your first time, I would encourage GMs to use a lot of risks until you can see how insanely powerful raises are in this game. And then when you understand how insanely powerful they are, then you can start bringing in sequences, because that's when the carts come right off the wheels come right off the cart rather, and things get crazy fast. And you will be scrambling to keep up at that point. So you got to start very small, just a single risk per character, maybe per scene. Just slowly get into it. But yeah, that is the game. That's all the mechanics right there. We just covered them. Have a good night, everyone.
Well, that's good, because again, we're not going to be doing our super late. But we just got a super chat from Luke. He says, as a translator, I really appreciate second edition's effort to fix all the weird non-English language stuff. E.g., El Fuego Adentro in first edition is now El Fuego Interior. So very cool. Very cool. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I mean, it seems like they're trying to make an effort here to do this, to try to make it somewhat accurate. You know, again, I know there's a lot of people who say that Legend of the Five Rings butchers certain uses of what is real life Japanese terms. So
yeah, it happens.
It happens. And so here are our skills. We've got aim, athletics, brawl, convince, empathy, hide, intimidate, notice, weaponry, warfare, theft, tempt, scholarship, sailing, red. And there's no action. There's no like, this is what this does, mechanics. It's a brief description of the skill, and a person is going to, make a decision and say, hey, I'm going to, do that. And I'm going to describe in the fiction what I'm doing. And then
once you describe that approach within a scene, you are locked into that approach unless you do something which is covered in the mechanics to change that approach. So if you decide you're using, once going back to sneaking on the ship again, if you decide you're using your athletics and thievery, for example, you're locked into athletics and thievery in everything you do within the framework of that risk, unless you do something to change it.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So advantages. Although you already have some advantages from your backgrounds, you can buy new ones. You have 5 points to buy new advantages. They cost between 1 and 5 points and may cost different amounts depending on your hero's nation of origins. They can only be purchased once. If they have the knack tag, that's now we're getting into like gamer lingo. And
yeah, before we get into the advantages, there's a chat comment from Dog that I just want to cover real quick, where he says the skills are approaches. Yes and no. Your approach is divided into two things. The skill is what you do. The trait is how do you do it. So that combined is what makes your approach. It's not the skill is your approach. Your approach is the combination of the two, the what and the how. Right.
And to be clear, one of the reasons I really do like Legend of the Five Rings is because more or less there is an implication that, in the fiction, and we're kind of moving towards, through the conversation. And at some point the player will attempt to do something. And the GM, and obviously, the fiction, the mechanics follow from the fiction, but the GM will set aside the skill. The GM will say, oh, that is a courtesy check. Oh, that is a, martial arts melee check. Oh, that is a, skullduggery check. But the player is in complete control of what they call Legend of the Five Rings, the approach, which is, in other words, what ring you use.
Yes.
But the key is, if you want to use the air ring in Legend of the Five Rings, well, then you have to do something subtly and sneakily and deceitfully. You can't just be like, oh, I brazenly stride in and I get right up in his face and I'm going to roll with my air because that's my best stat. Like, no, that doesn't work.
Yes. Yeah. Because you already described how you're doing it. So that's done.
And that's the way it should go. It's like, well, you did choose your approach. You did it through your role playing. You did it through your descriptions. By saying that you came in with, full of swagger and you got right in his face, you're rolling with your fire dice. That is what you have done. Now, obviously, I'm not going to put a gun to your head and make you do that. It's like, if you're like, oh, I really didn't want to do that. I was like, okay, well then you need to re-describe this. That's fine. You can use your air ring, but then you need to describe what you're doing differently because it needs to match up. So, so we've got a bunch of advantages, and these read kind of like, mini feats or something like that.
They're very mechanical. They're very specific.
Right.
There are some that have a K with a circle. Those are called knacks. Knacks have a slightly different mechanical way in the way that they work, but essentially you have the right of it. What's cool about 7C is you're given Y amount of points, and you can spend those points however you like on the advantages, but it means you're only going to have so many. So if you want to get like Duelist, I think Duelist is like a 4-point advantage, but unlocks a lot of stuff. But now you're like, okay, this tells you something about the character, but all of their eggs are in that one basket. So it does kind of pay to have a group, unless you're doing all dueling all the time. It works. It's probably to have the advantages kind of spread out.
Yeah, and I'm not going to read through all these just because out of the spirit of time here. But as we get higher up here, some of these do start to sound more and more powerful. I mean, even the 1-point ones.
I will tell you, signature item and large are amazing advantages that you can use for role play all of the time, and they don't cost a lot of points.
But I also like that some of these things, which sometimes we would call this mechanical FBT. Right, where it's a mechanic on your sheet, and it does something, but it really doesn't do something. I like that these are cheap. Like if they're gonna have them, at least make them cheap. So cast iron stomach. I'm not saying that this is nothing, but spoiled or rotten food never negatively affects you, and you still gain sustenance from it. It really is more of it's really more of a flavor thing, right? Like it may come up. But you're not taking that because you've got your new min-max cast iron stomach.
Well, where it comes into play might be when you're sitting down at the vicar who you suspect is got something going on, and he offers you a meal and everyone sits down to eat and it's poisoned, and now everyone is at a disadvantage during the dramatic fight against his honor guard, except for the guy with the cast iron stomach.
Right.
Once again, it's one of those things that the character has selected. Same thing with 3.5. Someone selects a feat. It's on the GM to try and figure out a way to make that feat work inside the framework of the game, or don't allow it. The same thing with this. If someone's going to spend the point, find a fun way to have them do the thing.
There is a distinction to be made there, though, which is I remember when we played Mutants and Masterminds in 3rd edition. I distinctly remember this. Matt the cat from our first season of Knights of the Last Call over there. He would always play Mutants and Masterminds with us. You got 150 points to make your character, and you use those points to buy your ability scores. You use those points to buy your flight powers and your optic blasts, but you also use them to buy these basically feats, and they were 1 point each. And like one of the points was like fearless. And it was basically like, you don't get afraid, like you could be magically, terrified, but like you don't experience fear. And it was 1 point out of 150. And I remember like every session he would be like, is something scary here? Like I had this due diligence, And then the game was also, I love the scale of it because for 1 point, you got to speak an additional 2 or 3 languages. If you spent 2 points, you just spoke every language. We're not gonna nickel and dime you on this. If you're willing to put 2 points in a superhero game and to be able to speak languages, fuck it, you just speak them all.
Yeah.
And so he had that. And so there was one point in the campaign where there was a really terrifying foreigner, and I was like, oh man, it's your time to shine.
Yeah. Well, in those cases too, they have to understand the spotlight. The spotlight has to move. It can't always be focused on just the one player and their Mary Sue isms.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is the most meta narrative thing I've seen in a long time, Ben. This signature item.
Yeah, it's great. I played a Montaigne duelist, and the signature item was the last bottle of wine from his family's vineyard before they were was taken away by the aristocracy, and he was super bitter about it. But he used that bottle as often as he could, and it always comes back. It comes back in the next scene, so it was great.
Yeah, have your signature item appear in the next scene if you lose it or if it's stolen. And again, the game is like, look, it's on you to figure this out. If you do it all, like you said, it might be part of the strange physics of this superhero world. And again, I could easily see where a lot of people would hate this stuff, but I play Fate, I play PBTA, I play these hyper narrative storytelling. I mean, the game didn't even beat around the bush. It said it's a storytelling game. It didn't say it's a pirate game. It said it was a storytelling game. It might be a storytelling game with pirates, but it's a storytelling game. So anyways, so after 150 pages of no crunch, I was surprised that there's this much crunch in the game. It seems like there's enough here that you could, reasonably make a bunch of different characters and really, not like in the build sense, but in the, I want to realize what my idea of my character is.
Yes.
I'm assuming that as you gain
very much, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm assuming you gain experience in some way or something that you might be able to gain more of these as the game goes on.
That is correct.
Okay.
And also, I think that this particular way that this all fits together doesn't feel very John Wick to me. It definitely feels very...
Oh, Mark D. Truman.
Yes, yeah. Very MDT is the way this feels to me. The way it's just the way they're worded. In there, they're so vague yet specific at the same time.
Yeah. And maybe that's what a lot of people don't like, because obviously first edition was a John Wick production, and this clearly has the signs of other developers in it.
Yes.
And like you said, that it's something that it's a style that I'm very familiar with.
Yes. I think the John Wick, where you see really his voice come through, is in the GM chapter. I think all this front matter stuff outside of the world stuff really does feel much more collaborative in terms of the design, which I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that's probably why a lot of people hate it.
Yeah. Luke says, I love We're Not So Different. So spend a hero point to convince a villain you are on her side. The villain considers you a trusted ally. As soon as the villain sees you perform a heroic action or if you refuse to perform a villainous action, the illusion is over. You only use this on advantage on each villain with a capital V once. And then the description is just fool me once, ... And that's so great, you know? Like that is just one of those really fun character build moment. And like when you take that trait, it's because you love that trope and you want it to come up all the time, you know?
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
And the idea of the first time you do it, if you haven't necessarily shared your character sheet with all the players at the table, but the GM knows, and now it looks like the players betrayed the party, right? But meanwhile, they're just using this advantage the whole time, and then when it comes down to the moment, they can't do it, and everything goes ass over tea kettle, and you just have a bunch of fun. Yeah,
Anon says, I think Anon was one of the people who was saying they're not a big fan, I think, of second edition. They said, I'm still not certain how involved Wick was in the system design. And I could honestly see where, because it's shifting publishers and it's shifting people, and there might have been certain creative decisions that he got pushed out on. And that was definitely the case with Legend of the Five Rings. And obviously, they gave him a shout out, but he basically wasn't involved in the 5th edition of it at all. And some people view that as a great travesty. But I personally like the game better. So, but again, I don't know. It would be interesting because there seems to be some very polarizing views here. It would be interesting to go look at 1st edition at some point here in the near future, just to see how different it is. My guess, my guess is I would like 1st edition a lot less. Is my sense. I feel like it's going to try to be like weirdly simulationist and kind of strangely I'm much more comfortable with this style of game. All right, so we're going to skip Arcana because I don't have time for...
We're going to skip it, but it becomes a very important point. That I'm just going to give you the brief log line over this, because this is where the tarot cards come in.
Got it.
Okay, so the way that Theah works is you have 3 basic classes of people that comprise the populace of Theah. You have normal people. These are your workaday, all the way from the lowliest peasant up to royalty. All the same, right? Doesn't matter if you're from the gentry or a normal person.
Got it.
You are a human being. Remember we talked about the Fate Witches?
Yes.
The Fate Witches are able to actually see the fans of Strait itself as it wraps around various people of very importance. In other words, they're like Taviran. The way that they, the way that they bend fate, and the Fate Witches can see this, which is why they're so important to Vodachan businessmen, for example. Now they see a blue thread if you're a hero, and they see a red thread if you're a villain.
Interesting.
This is the arcana that you were born under, right? How you determine what that means to your character is you draw these cards, and it tells you about your character. And you are tied to your arcana. You're tied to your virtue and your hubris. And those tie into the mechanics of the game very, very strongly. This is like the most narrow mechanical thing you're ever going to see.
Oh, right.
Because virtue, in order to use your virtue, you have to spend a hero point. But if you enact, or if the GM enacts your hubris in a scene, you get a hero point.
Right. So it's very, that's very much fate. I mean, that's basically the gist of fate.
Yeah, and what's cool about it is you can bring up your hubris if you really need a hero point for something. You can make the situation worse for everyone else.
Also known as a self-compel, if you know that from Fate.
Yeah.
Where you basically say, hey, this would be a great place. I don't know if you forgot, but this would be a great place for me to get completely screwed over by my hubris. And so this is very much, and I mean, Beowulf, I know Beowulf is our master. I steal everything and put it into my game player. But like, this is why game designers play other people's games, because you see things and you say, oh, I like that idea. And I obviously this is not literally fate and fate points, but I mean, it's hero points and it's basically compels and invokes. So yeah, it is pretty close to that. What I like about this though, this is something I really like about Earth Dawn. I like that this starts to make some of the elements of the game make more sense, because like Earth Dawn, basically the idea is you are called an adept. You're not just some guy with a sword. You're not just some person who can cast spells. You're an adept with a capital A. And that means you have a unique ability to shape your own pattern and the pattern of the world around you.
Yes.
And so very much like a Taviran. I don't know how many, all these games, maybe they just got totally inspired by, the concept of the Ta'veren.
Well, I mean, there's that chosen one trope, right?
Sure.
And it plays very much into the genre fiction of this world.
It's one thing to be like destined, and it's another place to almost have like a kind of a scientific explanation, right? I mean, like Ta'veren literally reshaped the pattern around them so that
that's true.
Things happen for them. And there's kind of an element here of this, right?
That's very true. Mm-hmm.
Anyways, so I'm glad we didn't skip it. That's pretty cool.
And it opens with the Fate Witch. That's what they look like.
Right, yes.
And
of
you
course,
can see she is laying out their arcana.
And of course, Ben, I'm sure you have a incredible tarot deck that's just sort of waiting at the ready for when this is.
Yeah, I should have grabbed it.
And okay, so stories, and we saw this on the character sheet. This is weird. Okay. While heroes work together to tell a larger story, each hero has her own story to tell. So this is like your arc?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The promise you made to the father on the deathbed, the man whose wrongful testimony sent you to prison,
yes.
The woman. Okay, got it.
Yes. And they are basically, they don't have to be campaign. They're not meant to be campaign spanning stories. They're meant to be like this chapter or this section of the campaign. This is what I want to do. I want to find the six-fingered man, right? That would be a story in Princess Bride, because once you find the six-fingered man, then what are you going to do about it? That's another story, right? Now I'm going to avenge my father's death. Each of those would be separate things, because that allows the GM to reward the completion of those steps with allowing you to increase your skills.
Yeah.
So that by the time you actually get to the six-figured man, you know that you can handle it.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. And so you have your hero story, and then you can either resolve it or abandon it, which is pretty great. And you write a short name about basically what is your arc, and that's great. And then once you've written that down, you can move on to writing the ending or the goal. So then you get to actually write. Yeah. So that's like the last question in Legend of the Five Rings. It's like, how does your character die? Like, it's like literally the last question they ask there. Endings do not contain suspense for the players. And while they should telegraph the player's desired outcome, the hero might not know them. I mean, this is like every die-hard actor role player's worst dream come true, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's and I mean, it's even written in that sort of third person ending, Hector lies dead at Leannon's feet. It's like, that's how my story ends, you know?
And that's the GM's job to figure out how he's going to get there.
Right. And it's not a question of, well, to a certain extent, it's not a question of if, it's just a question of how.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And again, I could see where if, Full Metal Dragon, who's full FMD, you are very passionate about this game, I can tell. And said first edition isn't very simulationism. It just did an excellent job on focusing on swashbuckling role-playing with a lot of different sword fighting styles and dynamic combat system, which basically sounds a lot like the versions of Legend of the Five Rings from the older editions, where it was basically kind of like, oh, look at how cool it is with the samurai fighting and all the samurai stuff. And I think about like the Avatar game from Magpie, which came out, and everybody hated it. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people hated it because they're like, where's all the cool bending fighting moves? And it was like, well, no, it's not about that. It's about, finding balance and overcoming challenges. And so I could definitely see that element here of, I mean, something like this, where you have literally a meta goal that is well established before we even play. I mean, that's pretty narrative even for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this does not shy away from what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, Cephalodog says you can create the unlikely conditions for your death. Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah,
I mean,
because by rules as written, character death isn't really a thing in this game.
Right. And, it's interesting, too, because, it's funny because this is so much what people seem to want, right? But then when you give it to them in the open.
The great irony, Derek, the great irony. I want my character to live to do my story. Then you go, okay, here's a game that does exactly that. I hate
this game. Yes.
I want to be able to die accidentally halfway through slipping on a banana peel.
Right. It makes no you're quite correct. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I like all sorts of different types of game, but I'm saying by and large, this is what, I remember that this seems to be what the general populace really seems to want. And here's a game that gives it to you. And then doing so in a way that it's like, look, we don't need to cheat or fudge or come up with some bullshit extraneous circumstances. Let's be honest here. Let's have an adult conversation, you know?
Yeah. You have decided this is what your character story is, and you can abandon it if you want.
Right.
But if you don't, it's incumbent on the GM to make sure that happens.
Right. And I mean, you know, and then again, it's even easier as a GM because then you're like, oh, I know what I got to do.
Yeah, but I mean, it's yes and to the max.
Oh, absolutely, of course.
So that does make a lot of role players uncomfortable because
absolutely
they're more gamers than role players. So when you get really into the thick of like this like heavy story type stuff, you got to be in it, or you will have a very hard time with this game.
All right. So, if you finish your story, that's how you, or your next step of the story, basically, it sounds like that's how you level up or whatever.
Yeah. So you basically get the gist of the outline. You just put what the story is, like, what am I trying to do? How do I want this to end? And then you just are concerned with what is the next step? What is my first step? And then each step as you go. And the GM will say, okay, this sounds like a 3-step story. Right. So
got it.
You want to avenge your father's death.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's find the Six-Finger Man,
yes,
dispatch with the Six-Finger Man. And on the way, that story changes, gets sidelined, and does all these other interesting things.
But that you just hit the nail on the head, which is specifically Inigo Montoya. Right. And we think about Inigo Montoya. You think about that story and you think about that arc, right? You know, his father slaughtered at a young age, challenged, you know, Count Rugen, the 6-fingered man, to a duel, left him with the scars, you know, and then dedicated his life to fencing and, you know, along the way lost faith and became a drunk and, a bum. And then he comes back and he finds this renewed purpose. And then he fights the 6-fingered man and he almost dies. And then he comes back and, you know, I want my father back, you son of a bitch. And then he kills him. That's an awesome arc, right?
Yes.
And now, if that was a TTRPG, right, Inigo would have gotten coup de grace by Wesley, you know, at the battle of at the Cliffs of Insanity, right? He doesn't because that's not what we're here for, you know. Or, you know, while Fezzik is climbing, he rolls like a nat 1 and he drops Inigo to the cliffs below, and to the rocks below, and that's fine for certain types of games. I'm not mocking those type of games, but we're here to see that story. And I hate that this game is very, very obtuse about that. Here's some classic story starters. Amnesia, Cursed. I mean, this is like, and as a player, this just gives you free reign to just be as kind of like insane as you want to be in a weird way. Yeah. You know, because you're like, you can't, you know, like, you don't have to, like, yes, of course I'm going to swing back onto the ship as the gunpowder is about to explode, you know, and I don't have to worry about throwing away my cool character arc and, you know, throwing like, well, I guess we'll never see the resolution of that. I mean, because something bad might happen, the story might change, there might be new consequences, we might go in a completely different direction, but, you know, you can go ham.
I'll more or less be. I might end up with some dramatic wounds at the end of this. Sure. I'll be otherwise okay. Oh, we didn't get to the wound system in combat and stuff. But
no,
when we get to that point, you'll see how that unfolds. That also is so story game.
So that's the next section, and we'll try to go through that a little bit faster, and I'll try to avoid my sidebars. And then finally we fill in our languages, reputation, secret societies, wealth, and wounds. I'm not going to get too much into the wealth or the.
Yeah, wealth is abstracted.
Yeah, abstract.
You can play a game within this game where you do space trucking, but on a ship.
Oh, okay.
And you can pick up cargo. Let's say you pick up tobacco in country A, and you bring it to country B, and you sell it at a profit. You get a little bit of wealth that allows you to buy porcelain plates that then you bring back to this other country that needs it, and then you change that for silverware, and then you change that for gold-plated silverware, and blah, 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 blah. You can totally play that inside of this game.
Right.
It's all in there.
So Duran's cat said something, and I immediately go into a sidebar. He said, falling 80 feet in a rock climbing competition and dying session 1 from a fumble could be quite memorable at the same time as well. Yes, it can be. Actually, it can be. In fact, one of my favorite memories of gaming is this is like early 3rd edition. We're playing Sullen Citadel. Someone climbed down a rope and into an area, and there was like 3 dire rats, and they like flanked him and like killed him like in the first round. Yeah, I'm not saying that can't be memorable, but if you are coming to the game with an idea and an understanding, and quite frankly, fuck you, DM, if you just made me read through 150 pages of fucking Thehan story and you made me do a game of 20 questions and then you're going to kill then I die in the first second. You know what? Then I'm not going to even try that hard. I'll figure it out later.
There are lots of games in which accidental death is a thing. And to me,
Absolutely.
that's kind of like the demarcation between a trad game and a more contemporary like story game.
I mean,
trad games, accidental death is very much on the table and it's a thing. And I love those games. I play those games all the time.
Right. Obviously.
This is a very different kind of game, though. It's definitely, in my opinion, it's worth the time to parse through it. You will emerge from this experience a better role player.
Just below this graphic is our death spiral. Always announce the death spiral with an overly melodramatic tone and music.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. And we talked, you kind of described some of the wounds and the dramatic wounds.
Yeah. So real quick, the way that wounds work is you receive wounds, right? And the wounds are pretty simple. It's based off of strength. So if you get hit with a villain, this villain is strength 3, you get 3 wounds. There are different ways to amp that up. If you get assaulted by a brute squad, and there's 7 of them in that brute squad, you're going to take 7 wounds straight off the bat. Now, the way the wounds fill in is they go 5, then you get a dramatic wound. 10, then you get another dramatic wound. Now, at the end of each scene, or at a time that's narratively interesting or makes sense, or in other words, if you're in the middle of a chase and 2 scenes kind of flow together, you might not get a chance to do this, but typically when a scene resets, all of your wounds go away.
Except for the dramatic ones.
The dramatic wounds stay until there's a dramatically, narratively driven reason why it would go. For example, if the villain, the Six-Fingered Man, you might start that campaign with a dramatic wound. You have the scars on your face. And until you expunge yourself of that, emotional burden, then you release yourself from that traumatic wound.
Very cool.
And that's what this game is about. It's not like, it's been 3 sessions. I still have 4 dramatic wounds. It's like, yeah, because you haven't done anything for your character to get rid of those wounds. They're dramatic wounds. They're not.
Right. They're not wounds. They're dramatic wounds.
Yes.
That's a great way to define it. And again, the game mechanics here aren't trying to be about simulating sword fighting in that realistic way. It is about the importance of the genre narrative. This villain in game terms did a lot of damage to you. That must mean that they are now narratively important. They're important to our story. They're important to our narrative. And so how are we going to reflect that? By giving you a dramatic wound. And and maybe it's a physical wound, I imagine, or it could be an emotional wound, right? Where you harbor a deep resentment, or you thirst now to prove yourself a vengeance.
I think of Luke's hand getting cut off.
Absolutely. Oh,
it's like one of the quintessential dramatic wounds.
Right. So we got another 2-page spread here as we get into the final section that we're going to cover tonight, which is Chapter 4, Action and Drama. And I do love these 2-page spreads.
Yeah, and that is so 7th Sea too, because you have 2 heroes. They're surrounded by 3 villains here. Obviously, they look like they're members of the Vatican Church or something. And if you look at their face, they're not too concerned.
Right.
They got this.
So we get into action. So this is where we talk about risks.
Yeah.
Capital R. So risks are important actions that could impact the story. We will talk about traits, the first half of resolving risks, skills, the other half of resolving risks. Remember, those are the things, basically our ability scores and our skills.
Yeah.
Hero points, which help you resolve risks, and raises, which just make your hero awesome.
Yes.
Okay. And then we get the consequences of failure and the opportunities of success. So we do, now this is basically the game saying you don't have to make a check for everything. We do all sorts of things. It's not always just, we do laundry. But when you get into, what, Powered by the Apocalypse would call a moment of uncertainty, of dramatic uncertainty.
Yes.
Then you are basically making a risk, right?
Yes.
A check.
And also that doesn't mean combat.
Oh,
it
right.
just means that there is risk involved in what you're doing. So it's a risk. And that's risk is different from a sequence. A risk is just a single roll made to overcome this obstacle.
Yep.
Now, the framing is really important, because when the GM frames the risk, the GM has to say, what the consequences are for failure, and also has to say if there are any opportunities that will come out of this. So, for example, if we have this the same thing trying to sneak onto the boat, let's say, it could be if you get discovered, or if they find, you know, the fact that you're sneaking the Countess on board to stow her away on the ship. Within 2 raises, when we get down to 2 raises, if you haven't accomplished this goal by that point, the jig is up and they're going to arrest you all.
Got it.
You'll be tried for some kind of crime. The opportunity, though, is if you do get her stowed on board before you get to that point, she is going to be put into a hold with a certain other prisoner or someone who's stowing away that'll have very important information into how to sneak into their castle. Bang. Now, scene is set, go. What's your approach? And then you just do the risk and you just role play through it.
Got it. All right. So if I'm reading this correctly, this is how I'm envisioning this. Okay. So there is, have you ever played Fiasco?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So in Fiasco, at the end of Fiasco, all right, you're supposed to go around the table one at a time and pick up your dice and basically say, like, it's like the closing montage scene, right? Usually in slow motion over music. And you pick up your dice and you basically, the number of dice in front of you is kind of how much narrative wealth you have acquired in your game of Fiasco. And so if you have 7 dice in front of you, you get to sort of narrate 7 moments during your sort of ending montage. Now, we'll roll the dice, and that's called the aftermath, and that determines kind of what happens to you. It's a guide to basically say, yeah, your character ends up getting completely screwed over. How that looks like to you is up to you, you know? So you might be like, the first dice is me like fleeing the crime. The second scene is like me hiding out and thinking I got away with it. The third is me, you know, meeting someone and getting married, and I'm buying a new house and I'm so happy with my life. The fourth is me nervously looking as the police officers enter my office. The fifth is me, you know, sitting in a court cell, you know, while the judge and the jury are all just shaking their head at me. You know, the 6th is me in prison as you see somebody coming up behind me to shank me, you know, and you're kind of just painting that story. I get to do 6 of it because I earn 6 dice. If I'm reading this correctly, the GM describes the situation, and then we all roll our dice, depending on how we're acting in this kind of particular moment. And then depending on how many dice we roll and how well we rolled, we basically earn a certain amount of narrative currency, which the game seems to call raises.
Yes. A raise is complete narrative control for that moment in time.
Perfect. And then we get to sort of exercise that moment of narrative control. It's like a player turn in Mouse Guard, where we can sort of say, well, we're going to change it to this advantage. And we're basically just collaborative storytelling with a little bit of a framework, because instead of being able to do it infinite number of times, we're limited by basically what we rolled. So sometimes you're going to have a lot of control, and sometimes you won't have a lot of control. And of course, obviously, if you're doing something that quote unquote your character would be good at, you'll have more control over that situation than if you weren't.
Yeah, and the beginning stages of the game, it's perfectly normal to walk into a risk and have 3 raises. 3 raises. Imagine you have 6 players and they all have 3 raises, or even 4 players, 3 raises. And you say, all right, when you get down to two raises, or 1 raise is that's when the consequence goes off, and like the bomb goes off and everyone takes 2 wounds or 4 wounds from the explosion. Okay, fine. So everyone now has the opportunity. You have 12 opportunities to change that scene before the thing goes off. It's like a ridiculous amount of narrative control over the scene, because now you're explaining how you're getting to the point, how you're getting to the end, overcoming the thing that you're doing. You're not rolling to see, well, do I succeed?
Right.
No, risk. How are you? You're not telling me, and I think that's a very important thing that John Wick did in this one live play. The thing is, never ask the GM, what do I do or can I do? Ask, how do I do this?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And Anand says, yeah, that's just too much. I love it. So because you know, here's the thing. You're simply reversing the order. You know how like some people say, I like to make my diplomacy check before I role play? And because I want to see if I roll low, then I know that I need to role play my character talking like a horse's ass. right? Whereas if I roll really high, me and the GM understand that this conversation is going to end with that NPC agreeing with me. It's giving us the instruction on how to actually play the game. So this is just the similar thing. You're basically rolling in advance of the scene before you've taken any of the actions.
Yes.
And so that way you know what to do.
You know how much currency you have to parlay in this scene.
Yeah.
You go, we have a lot of currency here. We could do all sorts of awesome stuff. You might look and go, guys, we got to get right to the chase because we don't have time to be, bandying words with people and stuff.
That being said, I understand, especially people coming from a more trad background who would hate this. Of course, this is not, but this is why we have different games, people. This is why you can go pick up, Old School Essentials and you can play it, and die. It'll be awesome. You'll be at 2 hit points and then you'll open the door and a rock will fall on you and the GM will roll a D4 hit points and you'll take 2 damage and you'll be dead and you'll love it. And I'll love it. Like, that's fun, And
I will say this, at PAX, we had 8 players each night. I think the first night we had like 10. That's a lot of people rolling in these risks. I mean, you're talking a tremendous amount of chaos that's taking place. We didn't have a single instance where a player went, I'm not really sure what I want to do here. When they heard a couple other people go, they're like, oh, wait, I have an idea. I have something I want to bounce off of that when it comes to my raise. And then it took a couple of nights. By the third night, that was it. They were off to the races. They were just flying with it. In fact, some of them were they were like, I want to do this. I'm like, well, that is outside the bounds of a single raise. But if you spend 2 raises, I'll let you do it. You can just make deals with the players on the fly. If it sounds like it's a little too strong, just have it cost more raises. That's all.
Yep. Satir says Smith would hate this game because he would roll all ones and have no raises. Is that even something that I assume it could happen?
It could, but it's unlikely.
Got it.
Because
it would happen. It would happen. But
yeah, it's possible. But that's where you get your hubris from, because then you can do other things and you have something better than raises. You have hero points. You could always change the narrative. Always.
And something that I'm reading here, it's saying, your approach is the method your hero has chosen to solve a problem. And, you mentioned how for a risk, you are going to pick 1 trait and 1 skill. And that's kind of representing how you're solving this problem. And you make 1 roll of the dice. It's not, I'm going to make an athletics check, and then I'm going to make a stealth check, and then I'm going to stealth check. And again, some people might balk at that, but that is very similar to the way that I play Forged in the Dark, that I play Blades in the Dark. If someone is going to, let's say, that they need to sneak in to get to the vault, I am going to be like, well, how are you doing that? And they'll be like, well, I'm going to, sneak in and, make my way in stealthily and pick locks and hide in the shadow. And I'll be like, cool, make a prowl roll. And that's it. 1 roll. It literally represents the entirety of the thing. And yes. you probably had to climb a security wall, or maybe you had to go in through a window. But the main burden of your approach was sneaking in. On the other hand, if you said, oh, I'm going to impersonate the laundryman, and then once I'm inside, I'm going to pull out a disguise and look like one of the hired help and get up to the upper story. And then, okay, so you're using something different. But again, we're just going to roll 1 die and kind of say that represents the entire span of action.
Yeah. And also, pardon me, also in Burning Wheel, you don't describe, for example, if the bandit gets on a horse and starts running away. In D20, it would be a check to catch up to them, or to hit them with an arrow, cut them off. Then there's another check that you have to make to pull them off the horse. And then there's another check as you fight the bandit, right? That is your trad D20. But in something like Burning Wheel in this game, you're not doing that. You're describing the end result. What you would do in Burning Wheels, you would describe, I am going to cut off this bandit by running alongside them and trying to pull them down. And then the GM goes, okay, this is a test of X. And the same thing could happen here. When we're talking about just a straight risk, you go, okay, in order to do this, everyone must use athletics because it's requiring this intense amount of physical exertion that's needed to do, or it's extremely sneaky. You must use some kind of thievery and combined with whatever trait you want in order to do it. But you're kind of setting those parameters of what the scene is, but the players are rolling the dice and then they're deciding when the scene kind of ends, really. It's not the GM that does that in this game.
All right. So again, and again, we won't be able to finish everything here, but there's a nice little overplay here that I think I do want to focus on, and maybe that's kind of where we'll wrap up here for tonight. So it says how risks work. When you announce an action for your hero, the GM decides if that action's a risk. We kind of established that. If it is, use these sets. First, the GM describes the details of the situation, tells you the important details that may work for or against you. Here, elements that she can use and elements that might hinder him. The GM says, you're in a castle and the room is on fire. Everything is falling apart. You're 3 stories off the ground. There are tapestries on the walls, a chandelier tied to a rope, and of course there is, and a suit of armor. What do you do? So then, as the GM, you tell them the approach. And the GM decides, is this just normal or is this a risk? And if it's a risk, if it isn't a risk, you just do it. Very clear. If it is a risk, then we move to step 3. And the player says, of course, I want to cut down the chandelier and ride the rope to safety. Okay. And the GM says, okay, that's a risk. So you gather your dice. The GM will tell you what combination of trait and skill to use. But again, inspired by what you're saying. For example, the GM says, this sounds like a brawn plus athletics risk. And to be honest with you, I don't know if that's an end of decision, but in my 7th Sea game, if I ever played it, if a player was like, oh, I think it could be, finesse, I'd be like, yeah, maybe it could be. And I would probably be okay.
I do it all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. It's a dialogue that you're having.
Right. It's a dialogue. The GM says that sounds like a brawn athletics. You're trying to cut down the rope and use it to climb rolls. Okay. The GM now tells you the following: why the action is a risk, e.g., you're running through a burning building. The consequence of the risk, you'll take 2 wounds. And again, this is something we've also often talked about PBTA and Blades in the Dark, which is let the players know what the potential consequences are before they decide to do the thing, because that's you're giving them the most agency and you're allowing them to make real decisions. The opportunities that your risk might offer, e.g., you spot a secret document on the desk that is about to catch fire. So not just the consequences of this risky action, but also the potential opportunities that you might be able to gain benefit from, not the least of which is avoiding burning to death. All risks have at least a consequence, probably otherwise it wouldn't be a risk. Some risks may not have an opportunity. So I like the idea that it's basically saying like, it's pretty good to throw in opportunities, but they don't all necessarily have to give an opportunity. And the GM says you will need to use 1 raise to get to the other side of the room, but the consequence of getting to the other side is getting burned. You need to spend 2 raises to avoid the flames. You see a pile of papers on the table dangerously close to the fire. The papers seem to be private letters written between a known villain. I like the idea that that's what's being said in the shit. A known villain and a local sheriff. That's the opportunity. And you'll need to use 1 raise to get the letters on the way out. So, and 1 raise, get out of the room successfully. Consequence, take 2 rooms. You can spend 1 raise per wound to avoid getting burned. And you can spend 1 raise to get to the opportunity. So basically, the GM is saying, again, it's like, mouse guard, right? It matters not what you fight. It's what do you fight for? So it's like, what's more important to you here?
Yeah. Saving your skin or getting the letters? Getting the letters.
And depending on how you roll, maybe you could have to pick one. And obviously if you roll really well, right? If you got 4 raises, you can just do them all.
Yeah.
Right. And just and you're like, yeah, awesome. But again, it's very mechanical, but what it leads to is you and the GM now have a very clear, it's like the game is giving you a script, and now you could play that out in a much more understood manner and way. Now, this is what I don't know. How do you get a raise?
Yeah. You combine the 2. It's just like any other skill game.
Okay.
You combine trait and skill together. That's how many dice you roll.
D10s.
You roll them together. You do all D10s.
And you make
sets of 10.
Got it.
Any set of 10 is a raise. So you're trying to play the numbers a little bit, and this is why this game does not work on a VTT. You have to roll physical dice. It goes so much faster when you're grouping your 10s together.
Oh, because you have to make 10.
Yes.
Even if it's higher than 10.
That is
so
correct.
Like a 5 and a 5. Okay, I see. 5 and a 5 is a raise, but a 7 and a 2 and a 2, which is 11, is also a raise. But you're kind of quote unquote wasting 1 point. What if I had a 10 is just a raise? So like the worst possible scenario would be like a 9 and a 9, right? You just feel horrible then because you're.
Yep.
Now, do you get any change from the dice?
Yes. Here's the best part. So if dice that are left over are called traders.
Oh.
The GM buys those traders from you for hero points.
Oh.
This is not negotiable.
Got it. Okay.
However, when the GM does this, he also gets a danger point.
Is that it's like a villain point?
It's the villain. It's the villain's currency that's similar to the danger points, but they're much more powerful than hero points.
Duran's Cat asked a question. I may have missed it, but is there guidance on what to do if a player rolls more raises than there are basically things that you can spend that on?
Yeah. So it does talk about this in the rule book. There is a point in a risk or in a sequence where it just makes sense to end the scene, right?
Yeah.
You just go, look, this is great. You guys crushed it. I threw everything I had against you. You guys are clearly much more skilled than I am at this. Let's just call it a scene. What do you say? And I'll give you all a hero point in
Right.
compensation.
Perfect.
And everyone goes, yeah, we won. And then you go on with your life. You don't try and, I mean, that goes for any game. Please, for the love of God, don't drag out a scene longer than it needs to be ever.
Yeah, exactly. And I say the same thing all the time with Blades in the Dark too. It's like, oh, what was I supposed to do? The first player rolled a critical success, and I was like, okay, well, you get into the vault. And then the second player, then the guards showed up. He rolled a 6 and basically got everybody out of there. And then what am I supposed to do to make it dramatic? I said, I don't know. It sounds like they just crushed it. It sounds
like it already was dramatic.
Yeah, they let them get their dub. Just let them take their dub. But Anon is saying extra raises can be spent to create opportunities for other players. Lug is saying you can spend your raises to help heroes too. There's always something to do.
But there's an important distinction there. That is only during a sequence, not during a single risk. We're talking about risks right now, not sequences. So
right, got it.
Yes, that is true, but that's during a sequence. A risk is a single roll by a player to overcome a particular obstacle. When you have multiple people doing it, that is a sequence and that has slightly different rules.
Got it. Perfect. Okay. So again, I'm not going to get into everything here, but again, like we talked about, this guidance around opportunities, right? Which is a fun way it's a dangling carrot, right? It's oh, hey, you're trying to entice the player, right? To spend raises on.
Yeah. Cause you want them to do the narratively interesting thing, not necessarily the optimal thing.
Correct. Absolutely. Which is awesome. Then we talked about the hero points. And again, we can get those through our hubris, which comes from our arcana. A player, he could choose to say, my hero fails. The player does not roll dice and cannot spend raises and produce other effects. That's right out of Fate and some of those games, right?
Yes, it is the hardest. If you're playing with trad gamers, it is the hardest thing you'll ever do as a GM. If you could convince a player to willingly fail, you all deserve an award. It is very, very difficult for players to kind of grok that as a concept,
right,
in a game. Yeah, I find Call of Cthulhu players, for example, or Delta Green players are much more willing to go that step and be like, this makes sense for my character to fail here, so that's what I'm going to do.
Right.
And then you applaud. But if you're playing people that are used to playing heroic fantasy, they're never gonna do it.
Right. I'm used to playing like we would play superhero games, and Aaron had a Superman like character, and kind of had his kryptonite, and Aaron would always be looking at his pile of hero points, and he would go, "Hey, Derek, I think those guards have kryptonite bullets, don't you think?" And I would be like, "Oh yeah, buddy, they sure do." And I'd slide him the hero point, and I'd be like, "Yeah, they." Oh, you know how you're super strong and you have all that, you take a bunch of damage off? No, ignore all that. You just get shot to shit. He's like, yeah, excellent. And again, a lot of people go, that is the most insane thing I've ever heard of in my life. But we loved it. We loved it.
Yeah.
Again, different stories, and different types of games. So again, we can use our hero points for some of our traits and some of our advantages, but we can also add a bonus D10 to our roll before the risk. And we can spend multiple hero points in this fashion.
And you can give a hero point to someone else, I think, to give them 3 dice to add to their raise.
Add 3 bonus D10s to another hero's roll before risk. This represents the first hero helping the second in some way, even if it's only moral support. And you can only do this once. And then we mentioned before, and we're not going to get into the danger of it, but the idea that the danger pool is what? GM Ultima points, as we would call them in Fabula Ultima.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's the... And Cortex... whatever that system is has something a similar idea as well.
I know in Marvel heroic role playing it's called the Doom Pool, but same idea. Or it's like Threat from 2D20.
Yes, similar. I see, once again, 2D20 never enters the chat when it comes to these kinds of games because it is such a unique animal.
Yes,
in what it does.
2D20 is like narrative trad.
Oh yeah, to the nth degree, but with like insane amount of crunchiness.
Yes, exactly.
It is such a unique animal.
It really
the way
is.
it handles this stuff. But yeah, conceptually, basically, yeah.
By the way, we are probably next month. We're gonna probably do like a big like Dune 2D20 stream, to kind of coincide with the movie being released and kind of go over the game and since I own every single Dune 2D20 book and product that has been made, I figured we could at least talk about it. This is great art for the title called the action sequence, because this is how every good action sequence should basically end, right?
I will tell you, I have yet to run an action sequence in 7th that doesn't end exactly like this.
There we go. And so this is basically saying if risks are your, I like to call them extended checks, but it's like it's doing a lot of heavy lifting. Sequences are your encounter. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, because we have a round. If a single hero is taking a risk, we just handle that risk. But when you have multiple heroes and they're facing a villain and everybody has to do everything and the order of things is important and the seconds count, it is time for an action sequence. A sword fight is an action sequence. Escaping a burning ship with a precious Cernith artifact is an action sequence. A high-speed carriage race down a winding cliffside road is an action sequence. Boarding an enemy ship on the open seas is an action sequence.
Yeah, and we should state that all the things that are described in that the paragraph, that's a Tuesday for this game. Those are things the game can easily handle. You can easily do it. You don't have to be intimidated as a new GM running this stuff, thinking like, oh man, how am I going to do this action sequence? After you've done a few risks, all you're doing is just chaining them together in order to make an action sequence. And it's going to be interesting the first time as everyone kind of gets used to the flow of it. But after that, man, it goes so fast. The velocity of this game is incredibly fast. And I think it's faster than PBTA in some ways.
I could see that because you're not, like you said, you've sort of done the heavy lifting of how much narrative permission do I have beforehand. I mean, it even says, this alone, every player's rolling all their dice all at once, counting up their raises that they have in front of them. And so, okay, I've got 5 narrative points for this sequence.
And that's when hero points come into play and people are looking to use their hubris and they're just like, how can we maximize what we have at this point?
Right. And so, so you describe your action. You spend 1 or more raises on that action. You also might spend raises to overcome consequences, to take advantage of opportunities. So these are very similar things from the risks, or create opportunities for other heroes or inflict wounds. And the more the more raises you spend, the bigger effect. After, I got it. It's like it's kind of like anti-golf. So whoever has the most raises goes first.
Yes.
And then presumably you have less. So then whoever now has the next most goes next. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
And it could even be the same character. So if I have like 8 raises and the next closest person has 3, it's like, hey, I get to do some things here.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. Villains always go first when tied with the heroes. Nice. Villains are aggressive. They move quickly to get what they want. I like that they kind of go out of their way to describe it. And then if you spend all your raises, you're out for that round.
That is correct.
You got to wait till everybody else spends all their, if you've ever played a Euro game, a worker placement game, the rounds can keep going. You just ran out of workers to place. And then, this is kind of like, this is very MDT. This is very much like a combat exchange from Avatar. Because in Avatar, when you go into a combat exchange, everybody rolls dice, everybody gets their action. And then at the end of that, what they call the combat exchange, the idea is, do we need to do another combat exchange, or should we go back to the fiction? Should we go back to the conversation? And this is very similar to that.
And I will tell you that of all the dramatic sequences that I've run, all the action sequences that I've run, less than 3 times have I ever had an action sequence last more than 1 round. And there's a reason for that. It is mentally exhausting by the time you get done all of that action to then re-roll again and then go, oh my goodness, now we have to create all of this fiction on top of everything else. 9 times out of 10, the best way to end it as a GM is to have the villain spend some influence, escape the scene somehow, and to just move on with the game. You can go through another round if you so desire. However, in my opinion, it feels very anticlimactic unless you already have like something insane, like a Kraken shows up in the second half.
Right.
And then it's like, it's a whole new thing.
Right. When it's like an escalation, like it's like to use a fabulous Ultima term, right? Where you escalate the villain to the next level, right? Like, you're going after whatever your equivalent of Davy Jones is, and you've got him beat, and so he unleashes the Kraken,
Yes.
and the ship begins breaking apart as the sea is filled with black tentacles and all that other stuff.
Yeah, I would say as a general rule, though, to me, just in my experience playing the game, it works better when you just keep every sequence to a single round.
So, we are going to end it there because it's 9:00. And I, unfortunately, have had a long day, and I still have some things I still need to do for work. But this is very different, and I got to be honest with you. This is not what I expected out of this game because you liked it, Ben. This is
I know, weird, right?
this is a very narrative thing. Now, Anon says game mechanics shouldn't be exhausting to use. All game mechanics are exhausting to use, Anon. I mean, at a certain point. I mean, have you ever played a 1.5 hour Pathfinder 2 or D&D fight?
Yeah, and the thing is, this isn't mechanics. We're not talking about mechanics. We're talking about you are creating fiction for an hour and a half straight throughout this sequence.
I've heard people, and I forgive me, I don't remember who it was on the Discord, and I kind of agree with them. They were talking, Dragonbane has become very popular, and a lot of people are saying they really like Dragonbane because they feel like it gives them energy, and it's a very simple game. That's absolutely the case. And there's a lot of people who are comparing, and I agree with them. They go, I love PBTA, but after a PBTA game, I'm drained. Like the way you are after, like, maybe you're giving a Q&A and a presentation at work. You're on the spot, and you've got to, you got to show up and make a good impression, and you're thinking, and you're constantly, that is a different type of enjoyment and fun, but it is draining. There might be some people who go, oh, I just get so energized. And don't be wrong, I will leave some of those Legend of the Five Rings sessions that we would have at our game table or a PBTA game, and I will be thrilled and just buzzed with the story that we just created. But like when you just go and see like an incredibly emotionally exhausting movie, you're like, that movie was great, I want to take a nap. I want to get a cup of coffee and just chill, because that took a lot out of me.
Yeah, I find PBTA to be much, much harder to run than Rollmaster, for example.
I don't know about run, but in terms of like how much it drains me down. And I think the opposite could be the case too, right? Where for some people, looking up D percentage charts and all this other stuff and all the numbers. And, I'll tell you something that exhausts me. Pathfinder 2, when you get higher level and you're rolling 3d8 plus 3d6 plus 9, and you're like, every time we roll, it's like I'm adding 7 different numbers together. Some people just love it. They go, look at how big the number is now. For me, and I've literally seen people too, but it's like every time they roll the damage, it's like the best day of their life, because it's like, what if it's a big number though? Yeah. But what if it's a big number though? Yeah. And for me, I don't care. But
and you're absolutely correct. Difficult is not the perhaps the right word, but it's the emotional drain that I feel after running PBTA is very different from running something like VSD or AD&D.
Right. Yeah. There's almost kind of a calm. Because in a way, I kind of feel like, it's like that I was just kind of watching, like what was happening in a way. Like I felt like I was less in control. So anyways, very surprised at how, I mean, this is a very near, and I also understand now why the community is so split, because if first edition 7th Sea was like nothing like this.
Yeah. Well, it's D20.
Yeah. I could see where people, again, it's a lot of the people who look at Legend of the Five Rings 5th edition, and they look at the opportunity symbols and your ability to, hey, I'm going to attack this guy, but while I'm doing it, I notice that he is wearing an army badge, and that he actually was in the same battle as my father. And it's like, wait, you were at the Battle of Snow's Drift? It's like, what do you know about it? It's like, I am the only son of, Tahiko, Hirujo. And it's like, I swore a blood oath that day that I would, serve the son of the son of my father, of my companion who died for me. I have a blood debt to your name. And it's like, why did that happen? Well, because I rolled 3 opportunity. And it's like, some people really hate that, and I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's for a specific audience.
Yeah.
If you like that kind of game, then you will love this. If you don't like that kind of game, then you will not love this.
Right.
And you should look elsewhere.
Yeah. And again, you know what? There is nothing wrong with that. Because that's, there's a reason why there's hundreds of books behind me. Because sometimes I want to get hit by a goblin spear and die. And I just laugh and then make, Dickus Biggins the second, as I,
exactly.
and kind of rub my hands with glee because I go, his attribute score sucked anyways. Hope springs eternal. I hope I get an 18.
I acknowledge the fact that many people aren't necessarily as fortunate to be able to play 5 different games a week, for example. So they might look at something like this and be like, I'm not going to ever do this because the sunk cost of doing it with a dedicated group of their friends is, I could see where that could be a problem. But if you're playing this and I'm playing, this is on Tuesday, I'm playing AD&D on another day, I'm playing Leg Star Wars another day, I'm playing Call of Duty another day, and Star Trek another day.
Right.
To me, it's another flavor of game that I enjoy, and I enjoy what this game does so much. It's not, but I can totally grok if someone, who doesn't have the ability to do that, it's a much bigger investment.
Right.
For them.
Right. It's a big ask when this game goes from being a game that you play to the game that you play.
Yes.
And I think that's true even for me with a lot of games. And I can tell you that if I start to play some really heavy narrative, I was playing Avatar, Legends, and that was the only game I was playing. There would be a point I was like, oh, dude, come on. I just want to fucking kill an orc, let me just go get some treasure, Can
you imagine if you're playing Dogs in the Vineyard, but that's literally the only group you have?
And that's it for years, years, right? You'd probably kill yourself. You'd be like, this.
Yeah, you would need therapy for sure.
Right. And honestly, that's a problem that Aaron and I have run into when we sometimes are like, well, this is the only game we're playing right now is this Legend of the Five Rings game. And then everyone's kind of like, well, that was a very heavy session. I was kind of on the fence there if my character was going to have to kill himself. It's only a matter of time, I suppose. That's a rough way to spend your Friday night.
As opposed to splitting the gold and who's taking the magic sword.
Right. And I get it. And that's why those games are fun too. So, great. Well, thank you, everybody. This was kind of an unexpected stream and surprisingly short. But again, I'm exhausted and I got a couple more things I need to do for work still, so I can actually enjoy my Friday. Ben, thank you so much for hopping on.
Thank you for having me. It's been
glad,
great.
I'm glad you said something because I completely forgot and I would have, and this would have been not nearly as valuable. So, and again, if you enjoy this kind of content, feel free to check us out. Patreon.com/nightslastcall. Yeah, we'll get you into our Discord along with a couple other benefits where you could potentially read Ben's deep dive on 7th Sea, which is many, many, many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of posts, probably thousands of posts, honestly, along with other conversations that are happening each and every day. We also have community games. I don't think anyone's running a 7th Sea game right now, but that doesn't mean that they won't, and doesn't mean that you couldn't be the one to run the 7th Sea game. So, but yeah, definitely, be the change you want to see in the world, right? But we have a very, very small but very dedicated Patreon community that, for the most part, everybody has, we have our scuffles and we have our disagreements. Sometimes tempers get raised, but by and large, it's a very much a mature group of adults who are, conversating and sharing opinions. It's not an echo chamber. It's not, a monolith. And a lot of people are learning a lot of new games and a lot of new ideas, and they're having very productive conversations. And it makes me really, really happy. So, while ostensibly you join the Patreon to support the channel and this kind of content, for a lot of people, the real advantage is being able to be part of that kind of, I hate to call it, but it's kind of a gated community because, it does cost money to get in. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to my patrons. Thank you to a couple people who came out tonight and supported us. Thank you to Lug and JMH and our good buddy GM Scott, all for your support for this kind of stream. And thank you once again to Ben. And we'll see you next time on Knights of Last Call. Good night, everybody. Peace.